morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all, and it's a great pleasure that I have with me not India's, but the world's leading economist with me to discuss where do we stand today. We've set a target, and this is what the Conclave is about. India at 2047. But the crossroads that we are at today, the Arctic Tufan, as it is being called, the economic crisis, and you've seen at least 5, if not more, and I'm only talking about the last 35, 36 years, the Montek Singh Ahluwalia ji. And he's guided the country through them. It's also a misfortune in this country, and I say it without any malice, that it's always the politicians who take the credit for what has happened, what good has happened in the country. But there are people, there are players who guide the nation through tough times. And I'm talking about 1991, we had a forex crisis. I'm talking about 2008, we had a subprime crisis. Then 2013, we were amongst the 5 fragile economies of the world because our rupee had devalued by 12%. Then 2020, we were hit with COVID. And now, there is the Iran crisis, the Middle East crisis staring us in the face. 3 of them, you were there to guide the nation. Has your advice been sought for the crisis that we are in today? And do you really think it is a big crisis? Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia.
I'm not in government, so I don't expect.
No, has the government reached out to you?
No, but I don't, look, whatever I have to say, I say publicly. So if people are interested in my views, they know them.
No, government does need sound and strong economic advice.
I'm sure they have a lot of advisors, so let's not get into that. Frankly, you said some nice things about the non-politicians in a system. I think there's nothing wrong with the politicians taking the credit if they also take the blame. Let me say in 1991, the politicians involved were actually crucial. Without the political backing, none of this would have happened. So I think you should give credit to Narasimha Rao, to Manmohan Singh, Chidambaram. These people played a key political role in 91. Now, as for today, is there a crisis? Of course there's a crisis. Not just for India, it's a globe. We are facing a global crisis. The head of the International Energy Agency described the energy crisis as the most serious energy crisis since 1973 or something like that. So it is a crisis, no question about it.
No, why I'm asking you this is because there's this certain amount of narrative being built in the nation. Oh, look at 85 countries, their prices of oil they've been raising their prices. UAE or America, more than 50% increase in the gasoline prices. India, we are still safe. Are we safe? Because the supply lines, as Shamanto said in his opening address, the supply chains, the supply lines have been disrupted.
Let's put the broad facts about the current crisis. And I've said this so many times that I feel I'm repeating myself. For the last several years, we've run a current account deficit around about 1.5% of GDP. But we've been able to finance this with a capital account surplus. That means net foreign direct investment, portfolio flows, etc., about 2% or so. So we really haven't had a problem. Now what this crisis has done, it will almost certainly raise the current account deficit because of the additional price that we pay for imported oil and fertilizer and so on. Maybe to about, from 1.5 or so, maybe to about 2.2% of GDP, okay? But on the other hand, the capital account surplus is going down from an average of about 2 to 0. So we definitely have to find a way of how are we going to finance this crisis. The problem is there's still uncertainty. The good news, I think, is that the fear of an escalated war seems to have receded.
And has it?
Well,
Because I don't know.
Yeah, good point.
I thought Trump was on a sort of an ego trip and he was so full of himself. Now he's blaming Netanyahu and the kind of words he used, courtesy access.
Look,
I wouldn't want to repeat them over here.
If my forecasting skills extended to being able to predict what President Trump says or does, I would be a lot richer than I am. So I wouldn't go into that. There's uncertainty. I think the fact is that my judgment, both the Iranians and the US don't want an escalated war, but they haven't found a way of solving the problem. Ideally, each of them...
How long will that take? Because the Prime Minister of Singapore, about a fortnight back, he said even if things, settle down today, it'll take at least 6 months for the world economy to be able to recover.
Yes, he's absolutely right. Because if the Americans and the Iranians agree today, it will take some time for the straits to be open. A lot of mine sweeping has been done.
Lots of mines as well.
But that's not the only thing. I mean, first of all, some supply capabilities of the countries around the Gulf have been damaged. They can be repaired. But most importantly, the reason oil prices globally have been reasonably contained is that people have run down strategic reserves. So there's been a huge reduction in the strategic reserves held by major countries. As soon as things normalize, that will come back as an important source of demand. So my guess is that through the end of this year, oil prices will remain at what is currently an elevated level, $95 per barrel. Now, mind you, 2 weeks ago...
If this crisis deepens...
Yes, then it would go high.
And we can't rule that out.
You can't rule it.
There are a lot of independent analysts who are even talking about $200
the thing is,
barrel.
When everybody agrees that it's stabilized, it pays an independent analyst to say something different. So it is an uncertain outcome. So somebody must speak for each point on the
But you've
curve.
also been different. There's this huge talk in this country over the years, and it started with the BJP, accusing and correlating the strength of the Indian rupee to the age of the Prime Minister. You've been on record saying, let the rupee devalue. It's at about 97 today, might cross 100, and the opposition is targeting the government. That the weakened rupee means India as an economy, as a power, is weakening.
Look, let's go back to the macro numbers I mentioned. If you have a country that has been running a capital account surplus of about 2% of GDP and feeding a current account deficit about 1.5, and suddenly the current account deficit goes to 2.2, roughly, and the capital account surplus 0 for the rest of this year. And by the way, that 0 is very likely to continue because interest rates in the US are high, global uncertainty is high, investors are in a kind of risk-on mode, as they call it. So in this environment, money flows back to the US. Very unfair, because the US economy has a lot of longer-term problems, but that's what happens in the short run. So India has to cope with managing a larger current account deficit with much smaller available flows of capital.
No, but you say a weakened rupee doesn't hurt us. Doesn't it hurt us?
No, let me complete. Let me complete.
Yeah.
You can avoid the damage to the rupee if you want the reserves to come down. I mean, if your current account deficit is going to be something of the order of $70 billion, let's say, and you don't have any capital account surplus, and you have a lot of reserves, and you know that the oil price is going to normalize within 8 or 9 months, you could let the reserves go down.
No, but we don't have a capital account surplus. The FDI is a problem.
Yes.
The amount of FDI coming is being outnumbered by the amount of FDI flowing out.
Absolutely.
That is a problem.
But my point is, those are the realities we face, and you have to look at the rupee in the sense that how would you prevent the rupee from depreciating in such an environment? I mean, there are only two ways of doing it. One is you throw a lot of the reserves to protect the rupee.
There's a recent report by Bloomberg which says that the RBI is hedging gold. A lot of gold is being sold to save the rupee.
I'm not in favor of massive depletion of the reserves. So let me be clear. But the only other solution then is you try to reduce the current account deficit, okay? How do you do that? You know, macroeconomics will tell you that to do that, you just have to reduce aggregate demand. You don't do that by banning this import and stopping that import. That's the traditional view that used to be used in the 1970s.
But that's all fancy.
That would be the worst thing to do.
I'm sorry to use this word, Montek Ahluwalia ji. This is all fancy economics for the common man. I'm talking about the viewpoint of the common man. For him, कि हम बलि का बकरा, वो कुर्बानी became a big issue कि बलि बकरे की कुर्बानी होनी चाहिए नहीं होनी चाहिए. हम कुर्बानी के बकरे बन गए हैं क्या? Are we paying the EMIs, and how long are we going to pay the EMI of the petrol and diesel costs constantly increasing? You're defending it. It has to increase. Is what you've said recently.
I think, let's be clear. If you're importing something, personally, I think whoever's importing whatever they're importing should actually pay the price, except those who are very, very poor and need some subsidy. I don't think petroleum by itself is a product which deserves a subsidy, whereas, let's say, essential medicines are. So I make a distinction. Secondly, if a very poor person is going to be hit by the rise in petroleum prices, it's better to increase the general transfer to poorer people, increase the kind of schemes that will give them more income, rather than keep the petrol price for everybody, including those who drive Mercedes.
But that is exactly
SUVs,
what you were doing. You were advising the government. I remember the rates of crude were about $120 to a barrel, and the amount of money I was paying for petrol was about 71 rupees, if I remember correctly, in 2013, 2014, 58 rupees to a diesel. Today the prices have not crossed 100. They were about $68 to a barrel average in the initial part of this year. And I'm paying more than 100 rupees.
Let me say, petrol prices have been a kind of masterly act of non-transparency in our policy.
And we claim that the market is determining the rates. Is that a fact? I want from the horse's mouth.
No, definitely not. Let me give you my view. Yeah. In 2002, under the Vajpayee government, they made a declaration that the petrol prices are now, the administered price system is dismantled. Yeah. Okay, we freed petrol, and the government quite rightly took a lot of credit for it. I think they should have done that. They didn't. Basically, I mean, most of the stuff is controlled by marketing companies which are owned by the government. So when you say the marketing companies determine it, they're looking for a nod from the government. So this is what's happening today.
77,000 crores in the last quarter of last financial year. 77,000 crores. And now the petroleum minister is telling us, oh, they're bleeding 1,000 crores every day. What about the 77,000 crores they earn?
No, it is probably true, by the way, that during the period when oil prices were low, these companies made a lot of, if you like, supernormal profits, okay? Yeah. And, I mean, there was some increase in taxation.
And the common man doesn't get any benefit. And when the rates rise, and today the petrol that I'm consuming, I'm putting in my car, the gas, has 20% ethanol, which is 60 to 65 rupees to a liter. You are not passing on that benefit as well. You tom-tom it as one of the major accomplishments of the government. Correct me if I'm wrong.
You're blaming me for what?
No, I'm just asking you as an economist.
Yeah, as an economist, let me say, we need much greater transparency in how the petroleum prices for the common man are determined, how they reflect what is happening globally, and what is the price that we are paying to our own public sector refineries. We don't have that transparency. We should have it, and furthermore, the consumer should be made to recognize that since we are more than 80% dependent on imports of petroleum products, this is a product whose price will rise and fall. But to convince the person that that's what we're doing, we should let the market show the rise and fall. By kind of freezing the market when prices were falling and sucking in the benefit both into the government and the corporation, we prevented people from recognizing that that's the kind of market they should face. So they're now a bit upset. Now, to be fair, the government has taken a bit of a hit by reducing excise duties.
But they earned about 43 lakh crores. That is what the opposition is
absolutely,
claiming.
but what I mean,
times they increased the excise
spent
duty.
all that 43. that
No,
money was
I
spent
agree
in-
with that.
See, if you want them, it's quite legitimate to argue that because you did all this, reduce the taxes even further. But then what you're really saying is that, and cut some expenditures. So I think when those choices are placed before you, it's not very clear. What are the expenditures would they cut? Food subsidy, fertilizer subsidy, payments on salaries, what? So I think if you look at this is the nature of the crisis. The absolute shock is large and it affects different parts of the economy. How you handle it is a complex matter. And you need to explain that. And probably the public also needs to understand that this is the complexity and this is how we have to go forward.
No, you're just veering the discussion to a very important point when you're talking about government expenditure. When we are talking, this conclave is about India at 2047, and target setting is not bad at all. But as of today, when we are sitting in 2026, does the government of India have enough money in its pocket for the kind of expenditure that you were alluding to, if we have to become a Vishwaguru?
It's a very good question, and I'm told in the rest of the day you're going to have a lot of very important representatives of the government, so you should ask them that question. Yeah. But I would say this, that the target we've set is for 1947. I think we should recognize that there's a short-term crisis, and this is going to take another 2 years or something, maybe 3 at the most, to kind of fully get over. 2047 requires a plan.
3 साल हम बलि के बकरे बने रहेंगे, आम आदमी पर दबाव बनेगा.
बलि के बकरे नहीं पहले, but that is how long it will take to get all the rest of the stuff working.
To be back on track.
Maybe 2 years, I would say. I mean, look, everything depends on whether you can get the capital account surplus back on track. And I think many people claim that one of the things we need to do is to completely relook our policy towards FDI if we really want FDI. And it's very simple. If you don't want FDI, then just say so and then cut the current account deficit. That means a massive reduction in demand, which will have an impact on growth.
That leads to a very interesting contradiction in terms that India is playing with. This crisis, when it unfolded on the 28th of February, after that there was this talk of Swadeshi. Make in India had happened in 2015 as well. Make in India, Stand Up India, Start Up India, Skill India, and all that. And manufacturing had to have about 25% contribution to the GDP. It actually decreased from 17% to about 13%. But today, whenever there is a crisis, we talk about Swadeshi, we talk about protectionism. And on the other hand, we are having FTAs galore, free trade agreements. We are talking about commas and full stops. Courtesy Piyush Goyal, I'm quoting him. Only the commas and full stops have to be now decided on the trade agreement with America. How can we be Swadeshi, protectionist, and FTA supporter at the same time?
Well, life is full of contradictory slogans, and politicians are good at banding them around. But let's be clear. I personally am in favor of an open trading system. The world has changed. The world is less committed to open trade than it used to be, which means that the benefits that we could get from it is less than they would have been. Nevertheless, I think we should not resort to protectionism unambiguously. Therefore, I think what Mr. Goyal is doing, signing these FTAs, in fact, in my view, we should do more of them. I mean, the US FTA, it's not an FTA, it's a bilateral trade agreement.
It's a bilateral agreement.
But
that's not an
FTA.
But it's more FTA than a bilateral agreement for the simple reason, or whatever, initial reports that have come. $500 billion worth of imports India would allow over the next 5 years. That's 48 lakh crores. 10 lakh crore har saal. Unka maal aayega. Unka maal 3 lakh crore, 4 lakh crore ka.
I honestly don't know what these numbers mean, because these are just slogans. Bottom line is that you have to allow the imports in at very low duty. I think that's a good thing.
Is there a fear of India turning into a dumping ground? What happens to Make in India? What happens to that lion, that share?
I think let's put it this way.
Yeah.
The notion that Make in India can be achieved simply by protection, in my view, would be an unmitigated disaster. the best Swadeshi policy we had was in 1970. When we didn't have imports, we put licenses, and you really couldn't get an import license for anything. So frankly, the logic of Make in India is, in an open environment, we make in India, and I think on one occasion the Prime Minister also said, make for the world. They have also said we want to join global supply chains. So yes, of course, look, when you say you're going to produce GDP, obviously it's going to be produced in India. But the argument is it should be produced in an environment where Indian producers are under pressure to be competitive. Now the issue arises, why are we not competitive?
Yeah.
There are 25 reasons, all of them have to do with government policy. I think it would be much better if government were to focus on those reasons rather than give protection. I mean, for example, our procedures are ridiculous. If you compare the logistics requirements, the procedures you have to go through with any country, successful country in East Asia, we are absurd. Now, for that reason, I think it's a good move that I believe the government had set up some committee to improve the ease of doing business. That should have top priority.
But we've been talking about it for the last 12 years of this government, or I'd say we've been talking about ease of doing business ever since 1991 when I was in college. I'm just
this is
getting into my retirement age.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, the ease of doing business is a bigger problem for you after you retire. But I think, let's be clear, the fact that you're always talking about the same thing is true of all countries. You have good health, welfare, better gender.
No, when we talk about Swadeshi also, Make in India, Made in India, Stand Up India, Start Up India, Skill India, that was 2015. And our contribution, the contribution of the manufacturing sector to GDP should have been 25%. It's 13% today.
Original target to raise manufacturing from, I think, around 18% or so to 25% was set in the UPA. Okay?
Yeah.
This government repeated that target.
Yes.
They haven't achieved it, and in fact, the rate, as you say, is going down. So we do need to look, why are we doing such a bad job on manufacturing? I mean, look, you need a white paper or something, and I can assure you that if you say, can we improve the quality of Indian manufacturing without resorting to outright protectionism, the answer will be yes, but you have to do a lot of things.
No, but protectionism has another very interesting facet to it, which is, I was just researching, 285 BSc listed Indian public companies are sitting on cash worth 5 lakh crores, on cash of 5 lakh crores, but they're not willing to invest in India. Well, and we are talking protectionism.
No.
So we are effectively stopping FDI coming into India because we are creating a doubt.
I think that you're touching on a very important point. That's why ease of doing business. I mean, the argument is that our business environment, for some reason, is discouraging companies from investing in India. I think you need to sit with industries, understand better what is holding them back, and do something about it. Now, many analysts have spoken about many factors. I can just give you a list of a few. Number one, our infrastructure just isn't good enough to be competitive. I think we're talking about it. Something is being done, but the question is it being done at the speed necessary? Second, our procedures are hopeless. The number of permissions that businessmen need to do anything is much larger than, let's say, in Thailand or Indonesia. So why don't we send some of our officials there?
What happened to minimum government, maximum governance?
Well, it's an excellent slogan, and I think we should implement it. That, you're touching on all the right points, but I think what it needs to be translated into is a specific list of things that need to be done. Let me give you one example.
Yeah.
The former cabinet secretary, Rajiv Gauba, a very knowledgeable person, he headed a committee looking at these quality control orders. Now, the quality control orders are an abomination. I mean, they were introduced that you couldn't import something from somewhere unless that person achieved abroad, got a certificate of quality from some babu in India. Frankly, the committee made the point that for capital goods and intermediate goods, you don't need this. Let the producer decide whether the quality is good enough or not. Of course, you need it for drugs and things like that. I believe I saw in the newspapers that he had recommended abolition of 700 quality control orders. About 200 have been got rid of. Why not all 700? So I think you can go through a list of these things.
That is where your friend Surjit Bhalla also talks about the deep state, 4 agents which are responsible, which are controlling India's growth, and which includes the government and big industry and the Congress party and the deep state. So are you alluding to the deep state is stopping India's growth story?
Well, I haven't used that phrase.
No, but I'm asking
Sujit, it's a dramatic phrase because nowadays, all the movies are about spies, etc. Yeah. So deep state resonates with, not just Indian movies. Everywhere. So the deep state resonates with people. But I do think that you need a ruthless sort of analysis of the very, very negative effect of government regulation and permission giving, which is definitely affecting industry. Let me say the problem is not just that it takes a long time to get a permission. The system is so complicated that if you get a permission, later on you could be accused of having given wrong information, so you didn't deserve to get the permission, and that could become an occasion, an allegation of cheating or even violation of FEMA or what have you. So frankly, you need to just get rid of this. And unless you do that, the system will remain. It's absolutely useless to say we have 90 permissions, whereas in Indonesia you need 20. But these 90 have been streamlined and they're now rational. That's wrong. You need to cut them down dramatically.
Now coming to one of your favorite topics, which is PPP, public-private partnership.
Yep.
And you were one of the initial architects of that. I was looking at the numbers, about 1,900 PPP projects, total project cost 25 lakh crores. This is Department of Economic Affairs till 2026. Now we had an ambitious target under National Infrastructure Pipeline of 111 crores that had to be invested between 2020 to 2025. Target setting is all fine. Have we been able to translate that onto the ground?
Well, I saw something by in a newspaper, okay, and that seemed to suggest that about 30% of this 111 crore had actually been achieved during this period. Projects are still going, so maybe that will get achieved later.
But a lot of these projects are also distressed. Only 40 to 48% have seen the light of the day.
No, I think what this indicates, in many of these areas, 2 kinds of questions can arise. That you want to do this, is anything happening? So you can almost always say, yeah, something is happening. It's not the case that nothing is happening. But then you have to ask the question, is what is happening up to the mark?
Exactly.
Answer is no.
Answer is no.
Look, Vinayak Chatterjee had written something in the Business Standard, and he reviewed this. And the National Infrastructure Pipeline or whatever, which is now listed.
Do we need to revisit the PPP model also? Because like I said...
By the way, this is not PPP. This is infrastructure.
No,
this involves central government, state government, and private sector.
And private sector. Yeah. But the private sector is sitting on 5 lakh crore rupees.
And
the government doesn't have enough money, or does it? Because if we keep
it
on
clearly
giving
doesn't.
10,000 rupees to women in Bihar, or 1,500 there and 3,000 there, sarkari ghoos di ja rahi hai to win elections. So does the government have enough money to spend?
100% it doesn't have. Actually, I think the World Bank, for many years, even in the UPA period, the World Bank approved of the push to bringing in PPPs and said we had achieved something. This government has continued that, done it in a slightly different way. But I think that we could do much, much more directly through PPP. What is currently being done is not actually just PPP. What is being done is what they call monetization of the infrastructure pipeline.
Yes.
So that means the government will build the asset in the first place, then sell it off or sell off the right to use, and use that money to build other assets. You know, when you do that, you lose all the project expertise of construction, in which, if you ask me, the private sector is much better.
And there is another serious allegation that the opposition is leveling against the government, that this model is creating oligopoly. You are only favoring certain business houses.
Well, look, if the concern is oligopoly, that can be very easily tackled by setting the appropriate rules. I mean, for example, are you setting unreasonable standards so that only the very biggest businessmen can comply? Actually, that's not the case. When it's sort of giving concessions, are you allowing anyone to have more than a certain number? You can limit that by saying not more than something to any individual. That's not difficult to do. And I personally think that the real problem is that in order to do proper PPP, you have to devise really good concession agreements and then invite for bids. Because then, otherwise, people say that you provided a concession agreement combined with non-transparent bidding and handed it over to your buddies. As long as a transparent agreement, the concession agreement is transparent, I think you actually attract better bidders. Bidders don't like coming in concession agreements that are non-transparent, because they feel that connected people can always handle that problem, whereas they can't. So it's a combination of things you have to do.
Last question, sir. I know we're talking about 2047. That's 21 years away.
Yeah.
And that's a long time. It's a very easy way of not answering some very serious questions as well.
Yes.
If you were the economic advisor, or you were running the country, what would be your vision, immediate vision, for the next 5 years, keeping the economic crisis in mind, because times are changing? How do we need to change? How do we need to respond? 5 years timeline, what will be the top 3 things that you would want to do?
I love this conception of converting a 5-year plan into top 3 things. The honest truth is, it would, and probably you want me to do this in 1 minute, right?
No, you take your time, sir.
No, I think let's be
I'll
clear.
fight with my producer.
Okay.
You take your time.
Number
This is
one,
important.
I think long-term planning is good, and I approve of the 2047 target. But 2047 target doesn't give you a reference point. Because in order to get to Viksit Bharat, everybody agrees, you need a growth rate of approximately 8%, maybe plus, in real terms, okay? Now, the growth rate at present is probably a little above 6%. And how the crisis might reduce it or not, we don't know. But let's say
A lot of analysts say, if we look at the growth rate, we also need to look at GDP per capita in dollar terms. That's only about 4%. And
No,
Bangladesh is growing at 9%.
Let's stick with the real terms discussion. The issue will come out. See, if you want to grow at 8% on average for 20 years, you're not going to do that in a steady 8%. What's going to happen is you're going to grow faster earlier, and as the country becomes richer and more complicated, the growth rate will slow down. I mean, after all, Chinese growth rate is now down to about 5%. So an 8% average for India means that maybe in the next 10 years, we should be aiming at 9% growth, and then go down to about 7%, so that you average 8%. So the real question is, how are we doing now compared to a reference growth rate that's relevant to get to 2047? I think we probably need to increase our growth rate by 3 percentage points, from about 6 now to something like 9. That's the first point. So I think we have to ask ourselves in the short run, next 10 years, what are we going to do to increase this thing from what it is now to what it needs to be? And I think it will be very clear that there are certain areas where we are lagging behind, where we have to do more and we have to do better.
Which are those areas?
Infrastructure is clearly one of them. Procedures and logistics is another. All of these require innovative change in policy. And I think one should, personally, I feel that rather than simply ask the ministries to produce better policies, but these are the same guys who produce the policies we have, we should set up external experts, including both representatives of business and consultants and people who know what happens elsewhere to make a recommendation that how
R. Jagannathan says the government needs a better talent pool to advise it.
But the government has an entire global talent pool, so let it just choose its advisors. That's not a problem. You know, what he's saying is get the right people together. But I think what is important is that the attitude of what we should do is create a distance between the experts who provide the advice, publicize this advice, have a discussion on it, and then decide. The idea of just listening to people and doing the things internally is not perhaps the best way of doing it. So that's a very important. I do think in the short run, there are many things that we could do in the short run, which I think would definitively give a sense. Number one, on PPP. Why can't we be more imaginative? I mean, for example, I think improving the railways, etc., is very important. In fact, we want to move away from road traffic to rail traffic. The biggest reasons why we can't move away from road traffic to rail traffic is that the traffic tariff system on the railways has overemphasized payment for freight, subsidizing highly underpaid, underplaced payment for passengers. So we need to get rid of that. Passengers have to pay more. Now, you've got two kinds of passengers. You've got the kind of passengers who want very high quality rail, you know, the Vande Bharat kind of thing, and you want guys who just want to move from A to B and don't really mind whether it takes 5 hours longer, etc. I don't see why we don't introduce private trains on railway tracks. I mean, the track network is a natural monopoly. So what's wrong with, instead of just getting the same organization to run Vande Bharat trains, allow a lot of private trains to run at premium times.
But then the private sector also needs to respond in the same vein.
Yeah, but make an offer and see whether they will. No, you know, part of the problem is if you make an offer which is utterly non-transparent, that is, the government can change the time of departure whenever they want it, and nobody will. You need to find out how other people are doing it. And I think that if you did that, you would remove the burden of providing high-quality rail transport.
So the bottom line would be that the government needs to be more open, they need to reach out, and they need to be transparent in the processes, and the processes need to be curtailed.
Yep. I would also say, by the way, since the rupee has depreciated quite a bit, it's a good time to reduce import duties. I mean, in 2016, we raised a lot of import duties. And I think Arvind Panagriya, who was an inside advisor, actually criticized that. He said, this is the wrong way to go. This is a wonderful time where the rupee has depreciated. We could just reduce all these duties back. And
so we don't need to be afraid. We need to play on the front foot.
Oh, that's always the case. I mean, you know, the IPL teaches you that more than anything else. Yes, I agree.
It was a pleasure having you, sir.
Thanks
a lot for your time. So this conclave would continue. There are more distinguished guests waiting, and you ought to be waiting as well. Thank you.
ABP Ananda, এগিয়ে থাকে, এগিয়ে রাখে।